Hi, everyone. We will get started in a minute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us today. We are excited to discuss the new network normal and what this means for our existing network security. Today's moderator will be Ken Phelan, CTO of Gotham Technology Group. And on our panel, we have Michael Hawkins, Principal Architect at Gotham Technology Group, Jonathan Nguyen, Vice President, Field CISO at Fortinet, Bill Lapp, WW Solution Architecture at Zscaler, William Barnes, Senior Director of Secure Network Services and Cybersecurity Analytics at Pfizer, and Charles Blauner, Partner and CISO at Team8 Ventures. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please input them in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. The panelists will address them all at the end. Again, thank you for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Ken Phelan.
Thank you, Shannon. That's terrific. Thank you guys, everyone, for showing up here today. We're hoping to have an exciting and interesting conversation about how things have changed and how they're still the same, based on what's going on with COVID. I know we are missing one of our panelists. Oh, here he is, Charles on cue. Perfect.
Yeah, no, I was there. I just didn't know how to turn on the camera.
All right, technical difficulties. So maybe just kick off with just a quick round of introductions. Maybe Mike, since you're at the top of my screen, you can just do a quick introduction for yourself and your role at Gotham.
Sure. Mike Hawkins, Principal Architect, working mostly in security and infrastructure for a couple of years with Gotham, focused very much on, cybersecurity issues across the entire space, really. So that's pretty much it.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. I've got you next on my screen. I've got Bill Barnes from Pfizer. Maybe Bill, quick introduction of you and your role at Pfizer.
Yes, Ken, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining me. Hope you can see and hear me well. With the magic of technology, I'll have us all working remotely as we have for many months and likely to do so in the future. My role at Pfizer is to make sure our remote workers who didn't used to be remote can work wherever they're at. That's involved a substantial amount we'll get to talk about today on what we've done with VPN access to enable that. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Bill. Terrific to have you as well. So Jonathan Nguyen, maybe a quick introduction about you and your role.
Hey, many thanks for having me here. My name is Jonathan Nguyen. I'm a VP and Field CISO at Fortinet. My primary job is to meet with security folks around the world and apply lessons from 25 years in cybersecurity and how do we get it right, especially as we go into digital transformation and all things post-pandemic.
Terrific. Thanks, Jonathan. Bill Lapp with Zscaler.
Yeah, so Bill Lapp at Zscaler, done a bunch of different roles. I've done the post-sales customer success, making sure people can be successful with our solution, and also a number of the pre-sales teams. And today I focus on just the end-to-end solution architecture.
Thanks, Bill. That's great. And Charles, last and not least.
So, hi, everyone. I'm Charles Blauner. I guess the best way to describe myself is I'm a recovering CISO. I retired late last year after about 30 years in financial services. I've been the CISO at JP Morgan, pre-Chase, then Deutsche Bank, and then I led the security program at Citibank for a bunch of years. I'm now a partner at Team8, which is a company building venture capital company in the cyberspace. I'm the CISO in residence there. And I also work with lots of other sort of companies doing my own advisory work on the side.
Sounds like a pretty busy retirement there, Charles. Excellent. So let's just jump into our current situation, right? So a word that's kind of overused right now, but maybe still true, is unprecedented, right? We look at what's happened with COVID-19, what's happened with this structure, us all being sent home. you know, and I guess there have been a lot of surprises for a lot of people, but I guess I want to start with you, Bill. Like, what surprised you most about the emergence of COVID and how we dealt with it?
Hey, Ken, thanks a lot. I think there are two elements of surprise. That one that I think was initial, and one I think I still live with. And the initial surprise for me was the extent to which this expanded and the rate in which it expanded. Pfizer has facilities in Wuhan, so we saw as early as, you know, the early part of February, as they were forcing individuals to stay at home in that area in China. We saw some increases in demand for VPN. And I remember several conversations thinking, well, if all of the US or all of Europe had to work from home, we won't really need to worry about our jobs. We've got bigger issues to deal with. And we found in a matter of weeks that situation we thought could never happen to have occurred. So the extent to which it expanded and the rate in which it expanded, I think at the time caught us all by surprise. And the part that I think I still struggle with is to think that we are many, many months away from returning to anything close to normal. While some locations will allow a portion of colleagues and contingent workers to return to sites and work in a more normal fashion, we understand and we're prepared for the vast majority of the company, at least for the next 6 months. The work from home is likely the predominant working environment for the vast majority of our employees and contract staff.
Yeah, that's great, Bill. Yeah, it's definitely a surprise. I was in lots of planning conversations where it was about, you know, what would we do if we had to work from home for 2 weeks or 4 weeks? I don't remember anybody talking about a distance like this. And Charles, you were on the end user side during most of this stuff.
Year.
I mean,
Right?
Yeah. Charles,
I think to me, honestly, the biggest surprise is that nothing broke. All right. Let's be honest. I mean, none of my previous employer, none of the peers I normally interacted with, I mean, no one ever built their VPNs for 100% utilization. No one built business operational models that assumed 100% of you. I mean, I should say no one. JetBlue, well, their call centers were always a work from home environment, but I mean, no one built it for that. And to me, honestly, the biggest surprise is it's all held together. It hasn't fallen apart. I mean, certain industries obviously are more damaged than others, but to me, the biggest surprise is, you know what? At least for me, I'm working more efficiently post-COVID than pre-COVID. And I want to make a bet that if you surveyed all the people watching this webinar right now, half of them are more efficient than they were 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's amazing. I agree. Yeah. Mike, you see a lot of customers. Mike, have you seen anything that on your side that's been a big surprise?
Yeah, I think two things. To Charles' point in general, just the fact that you know, there were initially customers that had some capacity issues that they needed to address with their platforms in order to get work from remote working for the larger community. That I think it was a testament to the IT industry in general that there was they moved quickly. Companies that offer offerings in that space offered all sorts of different either zero cost, short-term licensing and things like that to help clients get through that initial shock. But the other thing that I find was surprising was just the stark difference between companies that were able to work from home and those that couldn't. So it really falls down to restaurants and hospitality and, you know, a handful of other industries that they're the ones that are hurt the most, that are experiencing the most damage. And then all of these other industries were really able to just turn up remote work for you know, the greater percentage of their workforce. It was really quite astounding that they were able to be that adept to be able to modify their work practices to that extent.
Yeah, it's surprising how many things that couldn't get done got done. And I'm going to also launch a polling question about how COVID's changed your organization and why I launched that. Maybe Bill, I know the Lapp, I know a lot, Fortinet had a big role in some of these expansions. I mean, what was the manufacturer's perspective as this change happened?
Yeah, so with Zscaler, what was interesting was the pace of which customers came for help. I think every company had VPN like we were talking about before, but the challenge is sending all that traffic. None of these were really built to send all of your traffic back in through your VPN and then back out to the internet or to your applications. So what we saw happening was companies were having to go to these extreme lengths to get just critical business services. So they were blocking a slew of non-business essential apps. They were ratcheting down bandwidth. They were asking people to log off a VPN if they weren't being used. And so there was this big panic of how do we get all of our employees on? Because the ability to upgrade, like ISP lanes and ingress bandwidth, egress, I mean, that just wasn't happening, right? I mean, the ISPs weren't coming out to quickly upgrade these services. So what we had was, and I was still running our customer success organization at the time, we had a number of organizations that were coming to us saying, I have 100,000 people that need to be completely onboarded to a new way of accessing our apps because the VPN wasn't set up to scale. We've had then other companies come and say, I have 200,000. We had countries and governments coming to us. So over a 2 or 3 week period, what was crazy was we literally had to take a company like Siemens that is global in almost 200 companies and had to get them access to all of their apps, but not coming in through VPN because just provisioning them on that would have been very time consuming. We had the whole county of LA, they're trying to run the government. So I remember a bunch of weekend calls with like the judicial branch. They have to be able to operate and they weren't going to be able to on a Monday because they just weren't set up. I mean, they didn't have laptops. If you think of a lot of the government workers, they just had desktops. So we literally had the government workers going into the buildings, taking desktop machines home and then provisioning them. So it's just the rapid approach to it. And a lot of it was just accelerating, I think, plans that were already there. Because yes, it's work from home, but there's also been this shift of your employees can pretty much work from anywhere, and then your apps are moving all over the place. So how do you solve that problem? So I think it just accelerated a lot of the other customers' just plans on how you solve that.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Bill. Jonathan, what did you see over at Zscaler? I mean, speaking of apps all over the place and users all over the place, you guys are in the center of that. How did Zscaler?
Jonathan, you can give the Zscaler answer if you want, but actually, Jonathan.
I appreciate that. No, I think that the really interesting thing has been the comments about the need to move to the cloud and become a digital native literally overnight. And that compounds all the problems we had in the past about shortages of skill sets, shortages of cloud architects and security architects, and the drive towards contactless commerce, which is moving forward. And what we saw, surprisingly in some ways, was that SD-WAN became the primary determinant of quality of service. And so it reinforces the idea that security and networking really are integral if your digital infrastructure is going to be successful. And so your business outcomes can't be achieved unless they're secure. But the customer experience isn't going to be an enhanced one, and it isn't going to be a good experience unless you have quality of access. And so therefore, we saw that SD-WAN and security really are integrated. And we were able to help our clients rather easily because the SD-WAN capabilities built into our next generation firewalls. Indeed, the entire security stack is there, and it integrates with our fabric. And so, I just spoke with a CISO of a large healthcare provider here in North America just a few days ago, and he said, look, we went to remote working for all of our contact centers around the world, and we saw 0 complaints about quality of service from both the staff and the customers. And so I think back to Charles's point, the most interesting thing was what didn't happen. And I think the big surprise is what we're waiting for 90, 180 days out from now to see whether there were breaches that are just then beginning to be detected, right? And I think the other surprise has been the amount of people who are paying ransomware. That's been interesting.
Yeah, the increase of attacks has been big, and we've seen that as well, for sure. So I'm going to put the next question to Mike. Mike, quite simply, like we just sent everybody home. Do you feel like talking to our customers that they're going to be sending people back, or are we going to be a largely remote workforce going forward?
As was mentioned before, it's clear that no one's going back to work in the short term, and the question really becomes, when does the short term become medium term? Medium term is when you would potentially see some migration of staff back to a central office, but there's so many different factors involved that are very much based upon local conditions, that those choices really are going to come down to separate companies and organizations. New York City is a good example. You've got a changed security situation there, and you also have the health and safety of the subway system to worry about, and various other considerations that are really related to the high density living situation of a city like that. So whether a company, a company in, say, Syracuse that employs 2,000 employees would have to treat their circumstance very differently to a company of only, say, 50 employees in New York City. So I think medium term, there's a possibility that staff will migrate back to offices, but at the same time, this kind of forced remote working situation is really highlighted that there's a lot to be thought about as far as whether you should bring back the staff. Do they work effectively? Are they happy? And is it an effective way to operate remotely? It's a choice that really has been forced upon companies now, so they get to make a fresh choice here.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And that mood has switched back and forth, sort of like fashion about work from home, work from this. I mean, Bill, Lapp, Charles. I mean, any of our do you guys have any comments? Do you think it's coming back?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going to vary. I think the point about it's going to vary a lot from place to place and company to company. But even so, I think it'll vary from function to function. All right. I mean, if I think of my old security program at Citi, there was a large contingent of people that were my folks doing ID admin operations. And quite honestly, I could see those people never coming back. All right. I mean, it's a group of people who fundamentally respond to a work queue. They take something off a queue, do something, and say done. Versus my security operations center or the fusion center that we had built. Those were designed with human interaction and collaboration being fundamental to how they operated. And while the SOC performance for a lot of companies that I've talked to in the beginning stayed the same, mean time to response in most of the SOCs that I talked to has been going down steadily for the last couple of months because they didn't lose any efficiency in the beginning because of adrenaline. No adrenaline now. And so I think it's really going to be function by function that you're going to make decisions. Bank tellers, you know what, are going to show up in banks. That's just going to be the way it is.
Right. No, great. Let me just switch gears a little bit. I know, Bill Barnes, I know you and I talked about this a couple of times about, as you were working with Pfizer to scale up all the remote access, scale up all the VPN. We've had this conversation with a couple of people so far. I mean, and I think people are still struggling with that. Maybe you can give a little concept, like what did you do and what would you suggest to people struggling to still deal with the scale of their work from home?
Yeah, hey Ken, thanks a lot. It's a wonderful question. I feel incredibly blessed to have had an opportunity over the last year and a half to prepare for what we ultimately needed to do. And when I look back over the last 6 months in terms of our corporate leadership, the visibility that was cast or the light that was shined on our network team to provide this service, if we had failed, it would have been highly visible. Never before had I seen our chief executive officer and our executive leadership team wanting to know how many VPN connections could we handle. But for the last several months, that's exactly what we did. And so there was two things that we achieved, or two things that occurred. The first is, by recognizing what we saw in Wuhan, we did realize our VPN environment had not been built for the whole company accessing VPN all the time, but we had a sizable infrastructure, and we were able to increase with the addition of a few devices, 4 devices totally scattered around the world. We were able to stay ahead of the local closures. So China was first, followed by some augmentation in Europe, and then followed by some augmentation in AMER. That, in the AMER region, that allowed us to have the ability to support all the connections we would see globally. But the part that was important for us, and the part that remains critical in our future, is something we set about doing for a reason well before COVID-19 was even in our lexicon. The 2018-2019 year, across that calendar year, we moved strategically to migrate to Office 365 for the entire company. Because Pfizer has always supported a very mobile workforce, nearly everybody VPN'd in occasionally, not every day, but the vast majority of the individuals in the company VPN'd in from time to time. And as we were building our Office 365 migration, we recognized the need not only for Office 365, but other trusted cloud providers to offload that traffic to the internet. There made no sense for someone's need to access their mailbox to come across a VPN, to pivot through Pfizer and an encrypted channel that we couldn't inspect anyway, only to go back out that same internet connection it came in on out to the cloud provider. If for no other reason, the user experience was degraded in that sort of hairpin U-turn approach. And so we had moved all of our Office 365, all of our WebEx, and all of which is our predominant collaboration tool, and all of our PC backup infrastructure that's done in the cloud. All of those things were offloaded ahead of time, which represents about 40% of network traffic. So when everybody had to VPN in, 40% of the traffic didn't have to come back to Pfizer. And that was probably the fundamental enabling capability that allowed us to, we had to scale for connections. We didn't have to scale internet capacity for volume of data because the bulk of the data wasn't coming back to Pfizer anyway.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Bill. I know on the manufacturer side, on the industry side, we've spent a lot of time scaling. Bill Lapp, maybe you can talk about, because I know we actually helped, and Mike mentioned this, some of the things you guys were doing as a company to help scale people up. Maybe you can color that in or make some suggestions for some of our customers.
Yeah, and so, the number one thing is, I like that thing around planning for connections and not capacity, right? So, a lot of the customers are seeing that. I think on average, most internal networks are finding anywhere from 50 to 70% of their traffic is internet bound. So why are you sending it back through your internal network? And what we found though is you need to kind of treat that traffic in 2 different ways. On anything going to or from the internet or SaaS apps or anything else, you do typically need some controls around it. You don't necessarily need to do all your security inspections on, like what Bill Barnes said, because it's all encrypted and Microsoft doesn't let you look at it anyways. But you do still usually want to have telemetry on that information. So, when Charles sees that there's someone was impacted, you can go back and do forensics on it. So we do find that usually customers want to be able to still track that traffic, what were the activities, what happened, even if you're not necessarily inspecting the traffic. But you do want to go direct access, and we saw that. The biggest part we found there is, when you are going direct, it's going through your local points of presence. So Gartner talks a lot about a secure access service edge, so SASE architecture, and that says, quickest point to point. But that also goes for your internal apps too. So how, when your apps are going to Azure, AWS, and they're still on-prem, and you're hosting some in Wuhan or wherever, how do you now provide the connectivity to that in the fastest way? Because if you require your users to choose to think to connect into VPN, that's already a user experience issue. And then how do you now do capacity like in China, out of China, et cetera? And that's a lot of what we found is when we work with customers is how do we design their environment such that they're basically always taking the quickest path, no matter whether it's an externally managed app like the internet or an internally managed app in a private network or something. But when you start to push all that capacity and check posts out of your corporate network and you put it into, these different points of presence closer to the user, you're basically the backbone of the internet, and scalability becomes more or less the scalability of the internet for you.
Right. That's fantastic. Thanks, Bill. Jonathan, I know Zscaler's got a lot to do on this scalability issue, and maybe you can chime in on this.
Somewhere in the world, there's a Zscaler recruiter who's like, "Did we recruit Jonathan by chance?"
Oh, sorry.
I think you hit on the.
Sorry, I keep switching. I apologize. I keep switching back.
No worries. That's a great point.
Go on over.
I think, again, when you're thinking about scalability and remote working or working from home, all elements come together, right? So the challenge going forward is going to be zero trust at speed and scale. Millions of simultaneous connections, all of which will need to be authenticated, validated, log monitored for anomalous behavior, final disposition, and then access. That's going to be a challenge across the board. And so the advice I give is, your home environment most likely is not as secure as you'd like it to be. In fact, the NIST guidance says presume that cyberspace is now 100% hostile. So I think endpoint protection is a requirement. I also think that bandwidth requirements are going to be more important than ever. So I think SD-WAN, in fact, our CMO has said publicly he's got SD-WAN in his home. I think as we can go to things like contactless healthcare, and we've got telemetric medical devices, operational technologies where you have to have failover, you're going to need that type of capability. And then in the cloud and data centers, hyperscale operations and elephant-sized payloads, that's all coming down the pike. And so all of those things need to work together in order for you to achieve your business outcomes. I think that one of the clearest lessons from this pandemic, as we reflect on what worked and what didn't work, is the need to have both security and networking working together in a holistic fashion. And most companies are really not well prepared to do that unless they've got the right partnership. But I really think that the notion of hyperscale operations and zero trust principles is going to be the big challenge moving forward.
Thank you. So let's just head down to my next question. I guess it makes obvious sense about we sent everybody home, remote's blown up. But at the same time, there's this sort of feel about the cloud is accelerated as well. Is that something the industry is saying to make true, or is that something that's really true? And I guess I'll start with Charles on that. Do you think that people have accelerated their cloud migrations from your perspective? Sorry, Charles, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Okay.
There you go. Now I got you.
Now you can hear me again.
Yes.
Okay. So all the evidence is that cloud acceleration is a real phenomenon. I mean, every CISO I talk to, and now that I'm not in a bank, I talk to a much more diverse group of CISOs. Every CISO I talk to is talking about their companies are accelerating their cloud initiatives. I'll be honest to say, I don't know what about COVID drives that, other than, oh my God, this crisis happened. We have to do something dramatic. So let's accelerate something. The reality is, in some cases, it makes a lot of sense in small to mid-sized enterprises where resilience was a challenge, and it makes sense where you didn't have highly automated, very sophisticated data centers that can run dark. If you have to worry about getting people in to maintain your stuff, there's a real desire right now to do migration to let someone else somewhere else worry about maintaining your stuff. But if you were a large bank, for example, there's nothing unique about COVID that drives you to a cloud migration, other than, okay, the world has changed, so maybe it's not to reassess and rethink. But I don't think there's anything honestly inherent about it, but it's absolutely happening.
Yeah, Bill Barnes, do you see an increase of cloud acceleration, or?
I don't know that we've seen an acceleration. Well, maybe. I don't think we've seen a change in our adoption approach since COVID-19. We were already accelerating cloud, and one of the things we've looked at for some time is nearly everything we do in enterprise IT. Maybe up into the point of just the cabling, and the edge router at the SD-WAN edge, like everything else, I think is going to the cloud. And when it goes depends on a couple factors. When are the economies of scale such that they drive the cost to a lower point than you could do it yourself? That coupled with when are the number of users and using that cloud service driving the maturity of it that it's more secure than you could do yourself. So when cost and better and faster and cheaper all converge, I think we naturally move things to cloud. Whether that was true for Office 365 for us or not, I don't know. We'll learn that maybe in the future as we look back, but that became one that was a compelling migration. We're moving more and more things to the cloud, but we were doing that anyway, and I don't have a single example within Pfizer of something that came out brand new that we're moving something to the cloud solely because of COVID-19. I think anything we were doing, we were already thinking about. We were already in that direction. And I don't think the acceleration is slowing down, as Charles said, but I don't direct it to anything specific to COVID-19. I think it's natural maturing of enterprise IT.
Thanks, Bill. Any other panelists? Do you see an acceleration? Do you think it's tied to COVID, or is it just the same cloud motion we've had?
Yeah, the one comment I'd make around that is we're finding not necessarily acceleration, but there's a difference of looking at it. I think for too long, we've tried to pick all these different access things as a completely different use case. We have to assume that all this stuff is going to be here for some time. You're going to have tech debt. You're not going to move mainframes. Heck, we still have mainframes when everything was moving to x86. So we're kind of we're seeing a different approach of customers just assuming everything is essentially cloud. Now the cloud can be AWS or Azure. It could be Salesforce. But lots of times it's like Equinix or a colo these days. And then more rarely we're seeing where people still own a data center. But I think almost every client that we've seen is now just starting to plan for who knows what the future is going to happen. I just need the ability that if I want to put something in a data center or colo, I can do it. And if I want to move it into AWS or Azure, I can do that. And I don't have to change all of my policies, approach, risk. That's more what I'm seeing is just the blur of no longer trying to think or treat things differently depending on where it is getting power and cooling.
Right. Terrific. Anyone else?
Yeah, just briefly, just quickly, I would describe it more as a step change in organic growth as opposed to accelerated. I think COVID definitely had an effect on clients where they didn't have access into their locations, and they really had to make a choice to move those workloads out of their largely inaccessible offices and put them into a place where they could actually use them. But other than that, it's mostly a step change. It's just what was organic growth for cloud has now become a step change up.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So I think there was a big inflection in the customers that I spoke to about whether they were big virtual desktop people or not virtual desktop people, like customers that already had a large virtual desktop infrastructure, or at least the seeds of one, and scaled that around VDI as the method of handling this, and people that didn't do that. And I had customers say to me, well, listen, now that it's almost the exact opposite. Now that I'm VDI, I don't feel like I have users all over the world. I feel like all my users are in my data center right next to my stuff, or they're in the cloud next to my stuff. So I know we're the network team, not the desktop team, but fundamentally, I mean, do you think that VDI is a must-have to maintain this agility, or do do we feel like that's something we could possibly have? And I know, Bill, I know you've got some VDI at Bill Barnes and at Pfizer. And again, if you've got VDI, then you've got all your users in your data center to some extent. Is VDI a must-have, or do you think it's still a use case thing?
We're fortunate we've had it. I worked in an area a number of years ago where we were growing our VDI capability, and it was something that I had an opportunity to work closely with. So we've had it for a while. There are certain use cases where getting a Pfizer image device is a challenge. International export controls, maybe the rate at people turning over, And so for those users, VDI is a more rapid way of enabling them to have a device that meets all of Pfizer standards. I think in the future you won't need it at all because everything will be in the cloud. You'll have your own device and it'll be, trusted computing over an untrusted network, and we won't care, right? The network will be able to let any device connect. But we're a long way from that today, and so there are some groups where VDI allows us to package all of our specific controls in a form, in a way that a user doing a specific job has everything in front of them, and VDI for that has been great. One of the things around COVID-19 that for a period of time, VDI we expanded. So initially, as many locations were in a complete lockdown, if somebody's computer failed, this is a Pfizer device, not their own device, we didn't really have a good option. You couldn't bring it into, the local IT support. We didn't have the kiosks that they would normally bring in and get a replacement. So for those users, VDI became our PC replacement, because we had it. Now that we're emerging, and getting, comfortable with what this quasi work from home and some people back in the office capability, we're in the process of actually resuming our regular PC replacement approach. And so individuals are getting in the mail a computer and they're doing a lot more that they would have done in the office in the past. But VDI for us was a bridge for users who needed to get in, who had a device failure. And I think there are some users who for the foreseeable future will rely on VDI just based on the proximity of where they are and how easily we can get them a device that they would need to access our company-specific applications.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Charles, what do you think? VDI is necessary for the future, necessary for use cases, a passing fad?
Well, I think it's certainly necessary, or it's certainly necessary today for some use cases. I won't try to take out a crystal ball and predict the future, but if I think about like in my last environment, the biggest use case for VDI wasn't the remote access for our employees. The reality is, if for most of the employees at Citi with Citi-built laptops, you had direct VPN access in, right? The biggest reason VDI existed at Citi was 100,000 people that were contractors and vendors, and where we didn't want to give TCS or Wipro broad access into our environment for their app dev teams. And so VDI was a very easy way to have a very controlled access framework for third parties. And I expect that's not going anywhere in the short run. For employees, I think it varies. I have one client that took the exact opposite approach. Instead of moving everyone to VDI, they drop shipped 1,000 Chromebooks to their team in India so that they could get them onto a more secure networking environment. And so I think it'll vary, but I think there's some very powerful use cases for VDI. Whether that's going to be true 2 years from now or whether a new technology will come in to supplant it, time will tell. But in the short run, I wouldn't throw it away.
Yeah. We're seeing more of it, and I think it's also sort of intermingled with this problem. So we had someone commented before about the home network being compromised, right? Like, can we secure home networks? To what extent do we feel safe with that? I mean, you've got a corporate asset, but it's on a questionable network. I don't know, Jonathan from Fortinet. What do you feel about this solution in terms of securing home networks, securing the whole end-to-end thing, using VDI in the mix? What's your architecture for this?
Yeah, so I think at Fortinet we have a pretty broad array of capabilities and form factors, whether it's appliance or whether it's virtualized. But the idea, I think SASE, as mentioned earlier by Bill, trusted computing over non-trusted networks is going to be the way forward. I think what I'm really focused on is how do I apply those 5 elements of zero trust at speed and scale. I need to authenticate the user, validate the request, log and monitor everything. And then I would add via CASB and UEBA, understand what is the final disposition of what was accessed from a CIA perspective. I think that becomes key. I also, as a side note, I would say, don't trust your home network or those networks that really are very vulnerable. I would say beyond anything else, personally, get a credit freeze, not credit monitoring, so that you demonetize your risk, so that no one can monetize information about you if they receive it. That's just my personal tip for the audience.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. Mike or Lapp, do you guys have any comments on securing home networks?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what was said. Is trusted connections over an unsecured network. I think the days, in our view, the days of trying to tie what network I'm on should decide what apps I can access are kind of gone by. It's kind of like we used to have private networks for phones, and then that went to VoIP, and now it's on a shared corporate network. It's that same move of networks plumbing, right? I don't need a super smart or super secure plumbing. I just need to know that water comes to my house, and then from there I can make sure that we have security. So a lot of our clients' view is they just don't trust anything. It's not, I don't care if it's the home network, if it's a mobile network, if it's the office. I mean, there's bad stuff inside of our corporate networks as well. So instead, the idea is you have a user, and I trust your user, I trust your identity, and that's it. And I inspect what traffic comes and goes. But that's it. Like, don't ever actually go onto a network. That's been our philosophy, because if go on a network, then I don't need to worry about protecting or doing all this east-west or anything else. And so our approach has always been to essentially proxy those connections. So we try to solve the problem by just removing the problem. You're not on that home network. Your computer's completely encapsulated.
Yeah, I would say certainly the work from home model needs to include a pretty strong corporate standard for the laptops, obviously, the devices that go out there. Even if they're only accessing VDI, there's still keyloggers and other nasties out there that can, potentially hijack sessions and look at things that shouldn't be looked at. And who doesn't have? Well, sorry, some of us have, teenage sons who have completely suspect rigs sitting in their room that we don't even get to look at or touch, and various other devices, TVs and et cetera, that really are completely unknown. And so if we consider the remote office as a little microcosm, a small island of the corporate network, so to speak, then there need to be sufficient protections for that. And so it's an advanced firewall is recommended. Even if it's just for the one laptop, that's the cost of doing business in that model.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So let's just kind of wrap this up with one big question at the end here, right? So we've got our users at home, and they're addressing cloud services, and Bill Barnes talked to us before, right? About they're addressing Office 365. Let's say they're also addressing some form of software as a service, whatever's core to their business. If they're a hospital, they're an Epic in the cloud. If they're there's other cloud services that they're making use of. So what architecture do we need if the users at home and the services are in the cloud? What traffic do we need to look at, and what are we looking for, right? What do we need to do with that traffic, and how do we do it? And that's just pencil sketch that up for, like, and I'll start with you, Charles. What are your concerns with that traffic, and is it the same problem you've always had internally, that just writ large? How do you look at that architecture of users at home reaching into cloud services?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to vary with the approaches that you've taken. So City, for example, where I was last caring about this, took a very conservative approach and literally backhauled all traffic through the City network. And they were taking this very conservative approach. Honestly, Ken, I think it's really going to vary with people's risk levels and nature of their business, their risk tolerance. I I think it's also going to depend on the nature of what you put into the cloud. I mean, if I think about it, there really is no reason not to be using a Salesforce-like thing, a Workday-like thing in any large corporation, because that's, unless you're Salesforce or Workday, that's not your business. So you should be using these SaaS services to make your companies more effective. But what the risk is, it's going to actually be very unique. I mean, and whether you're going to go with ultra secure desktops that are company provisioned or a whole BYOD environment. Let's be honest. I mean, the new people coming into our workforce really aren't overly interested in a corporate laptop. They want to use their own device and the like. And so all those things are going to come in, and it's going to depend on the kind of culture you're trying to create for your company. I don't think there's one easy answer to that question, unfortunately.
Good. No, well, it's good, but it's good information. Thanks, Bill. Bill Barnes, what's your perspective on what traffic do you need to see when when your employees working from home? What don't you need to see? How are you kind of making those decisions on an app by app basis?
And I don't know that I'm doing it on an app by app basis, but one of the things you and I have had a chance to talk about on a few occasions is, in some cases, we run traffic through sensors that can't look at it. And if we do that, and I'm using half of, a threat and inspection engine is blindly looking at encrypted traffic it can't see into, then that's a waste of resource. So I think in this, what we're looking to do, and the half might be an extreme, but a quarter is not. That's probably a conservative amount of traffic. You're running through firewalls and IPSs that you might not be getting any protection from. So one of the things I think is important is, as we go forward and you think about your offload approach, if you're offloading traffic to the cloud and you're losing visibility because it's not running through your threat environment, you better have some logging with that cloud provider to understand what's going on, or you'll be blind to things. But I think when we have a limited number of trusted cloud providers and we can get that telemetry on what's going on, then we should look to not have that information run through our expensive security appliances. And so not only is it offloading it from the VPN user, which we've talked about, but even within our data center, if traffic from large offices is routing through a data center and going through our demilitarized zone security areas, there's an awful lot of traffic you're probably putting through expensive equipment that you don't need to. So in addition to offloading those cloud traffic from our VPN users within Pfizer, we've also done it at our data center. Before it gets to the precious inspection engines of the firewall of your choice or the advanced threat detection capabilities that we have installed, we send that traffic out. We don't put it through the expensive inspection. We get it directly to the cloud. But only when we know what's going to the cloud, we have some form of telemetry from the cloud provider, so we're not completely blind to the activity.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. I guess I'll start with Bill Lapp. Bill, what does Zscaler think about the architecture of the future in this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd ask, Bill Barnes, if it wasn't expensive to send all that through and it didn't cost you anything extra, would you prefer to send it through the same systems that you have consistent logging and not trying to merge like the cloud providers logs with your own? I wonder,
what my response on that is the user experience and delay would tell you it's not optimal. So we're being driven out of a need to conserve resources and, offset by the need to ensure the most, effective user experience. And what I'll tell you, our users tell us, and we knew this to be true, and this is why we pressed as hard as we did, they can connect to email faster today than when they were in the office and we had on-premise email, right? They're home. We send them direct O365, and their performance is better than it used to be when they were in the office and their email was, in our data center. And so I think user performance has a big reason as to why you don't want to route traffic through paths that, aren't optimal.
Yeah. So I think, I guess my view would be is if you could route quickest point from your users to your apps, and you have user experience intact, and you can do it, with all the native network peering, backbone peering, etc. and you can have a single view of telemetry that's consistent, so you can see all of your transactions. That's sort of, you need that basic level. You need to be able to have all the telemetry, have visibility to every transaction, know which users are, and so forth, with that supreme user experience. And then you also want to be able to run the traffic that you can inspect to do that, right? And you might not do it for everything, but you want to do it for certain things and be able to inspect it. But I think the problem has been is we made a lot of decisions in our environment to not do something because user experience is poor if you do it, or it's expensive if you do it. And I think as an industry, we need to really focus on removing that, because when we do that, we have to treat everything as a separate type of flow, a separate use case, and it adds a lot of complexity. And user experience is bad because then they're having to make choices of how to connect or what to do. So our view is if you can do it with great user experience, you can do it, whether it's cloud, on-prem, or anything else, then you shouldn't let user experience and cost stand in the way of doing inspection, getting telemetry, and looking at everything. And may require a completely different architecture to do that than the traditional approach of hardware, appliances, and things like that. But I think there are solutions out there that do that.
Sure.
Hey, Ken, I'd like to offer to Bill. I agree with you. And
Yep.
I think one of the things we're doing in that, and we talked about cloud adoption, this is taking the capabilities of our data center DMZs and putting that capability in the cloud. So it's in the path. We're not routing it different, but we have inspection engines in the cloud as that data is going. And I think that is definitely a direction in the future.
And that's the SASE architecture. The question then becomes, how many points of presence are you able to do that close to the user at scale and cost, right? Versus virtual machines or moving stuff around, because like you mentioned, you got to have something to move in China. You probably have to have something in Shanghai. You got users going to Singapore. You've got, New Jersey, of course, and everything else. And it sort of starts to become a challenge, and it hits that threshold you mentioned earlier of, well, how much, where's that threshold of cost and diversity of points of presence? Where does that cost, inflection point happen?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bill. And certainly complexity is not our friend. We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in. We'll try to get a couple minutes at the end and answer some questions. But Jonathan, maybe you have some thoughts about what this architecture might look like.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. What I would do is I would use SASE to apply a least privileged approach across my enterprise. I'm going to make sure I use CASB and UEBA to understand what was accessed in the cloud and what is the final disposition of the data that was accessed, what happened to that. And then I'm going to make sure that I take a look at my endpoints. But it's any number of technologies. What I think is really key, though, is what is the operating principle that you're trying to apply? My main concern in the 12,000 data breaches I've researched has been the disconnect between the business strategy, the security strategies, and the TTP. Too often the case, technologies are integrated, but they're disconnected from controls. So more than ever before, I look for a holistic approach that's sound, and then I look at technologies to execute that. But I think that's at least privileged and SASE are going to go a long way towards securing that interaction. Because there needs to be a focus on your privileged access, your elevated privileged access, right?
For sure. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Mike, anything to chime in on this?
Just that SASE is a model that clients really need to look at, because I think it has a lot of benefits, solves a lot of problems, and it's not widely understood yet. So it's just something that I would encourage. If I had lots of clients in the room, I would say, look at the Gartner paper on it, and have a look at the different SASE offerings, because they bring a lot to the problem.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. I don't have any questions coming in here, but if you guys have questions, please shoot them in. I have one quick last lightning round. So quick answer on a crazy question. And one of the questions we did get before this thing was, when you say perimeter, what do you even mean at this point? Like, do we have a perimeter? If we don't have a perimeter, do we really need firewalls? So that's my question. Firewalls, do we really need them? And I'm going to start with Jonathan because he's from the firewall company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think firewalls will be around for some time. The key, though, is to reduce the complexity. So what we've done is that we've got a next generation firewall that has this complete security stack with SD-WAN, which is integrated now into probably the industry's largest and most comprehensive SASE platform. And so you manage complexity by doing that, but the firewall is going to be with us for some time.
Great. Bill? Bill Lapp. Yeah.
I think firewalls is a misnomer. It's a tool to deliver a capability. I think what people really want to be able to do is, can I inspect all ports and protocols of traffic, and can I make decisions on that according to policy and inspect it at various points? That's not going away, and you have to do it. I think trying to install things or sensors or catch points is probably going to change. The packaging of how you do that will change. But I think you'll always need to inspect all ports and protocols and have business policy and logic to do that.
Awesome. Mike, I'll go to you. Firewalls, do we really need them?
We were talking about for work from home remote. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the evolution of the home network, it's never had security at all. It's been spotty, it's been dangerous, it's been the Wild West. And we're finally getting to a point now with smart TVs and all the different types of devices that you find in homes, home control systems and whatnot, that it's actually becoming necessary to isolate those environments separately, inspect traffic more comprehensively. SSL inspection is needed, proper sanitizing of email attachments and things like that wherever possible. Yeah, absolutely. Firewalls, advanced, next gen firewalls are going to be much more prolific in the home setting, I think. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Bill Barnes, you going to keep your firewalls or are you getting rid of them?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love the name. I think that was shared earlier. I think the notion of the firewall is many, many things. There will be a device, at the edges of the network, wherever they may be, at our data centers and homes, where there is some sort of inspection engine. Things that will block connections that shouldn't be coming in. Things that will block connections that shouldn't be going out. Giving you visibility into data loss, giving you visibility into malware. And so it's a firewall for sure in terms of the connections, IP addresses and ports, but I think we're going to see the evolution of that device class continue to grow to be able to do more around looking into the information, knowing much more is encrypted, and being able to block things that are bad.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Charles, just to finish us up here, we're just about out of time. Any last thoughts on this subject?
Well, I think it was covered well. I mean, some form of device at the edge of your network, which will be a new place, is always going to be necessary. And I think those edge devices are going to actually, in some sense, get much broader in their capability because we've built a lot of features that we've turned into product companies that need to be turned back into features.
I love that. Thanks, Charles. Well, thank you guys all for coming. We had over 50 people on the call today, which was terrific. I want to thank my panelists for all the great answers and for putting up with my forgetting who works for which company. That was very nice of you. And I'm sure we'll do this again soon. But thank you for all the customers, and we'll be in touch with any questions or follow up. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ken.
Bye, everyone.